On this episode of the Golden Legacy series, I am delighted to welcome Sally Munday, CEO of UK Sport. Throughout this episode, Sally and I discuss her remarkable career. We will hear about her journey from local leisure management to her time at England Hockey and to her current role at UK Sport. We discuss the role UK Sport plays in elite sport, their current strategic plan, powering success, inspiring impact, and how the organisation navigated the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sally shares insights into her current achievements in her career so far, as well as her ongoing commitment to diversity and inclusion for all. We hope you enjoy this episode. So it's great to have Sally here today. I'm actually really excited that we've got a female leader within the sector, somebody who's also very inspiring and got a good reputation. Sally, welcome, and I'm pleased that you've decided to join us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real joy to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Good. For those that don't know you, and I know you've been in the sector for a long time, so, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about your background before you became CEO of UK Sport.
Okay, so I've spent all of my career in sport. I started off in local authority leisure management and then moved into sports development, starting with British tennis. And then I spent a long period with England and Great Britain hockey and kind of worked my way up through that organisation and ended up doing the chief exec role there for 10 years before I moved here to UK Sport 5.5 years ago as CEO.
Wow, so you've actually been a CEO and a female leader for quite some time. Talking about that and coming from hockey, what made you go from hockey to this role? Because that's very sports specific, whereas UK Sport is right across all the sports. You've got lots of organisations that you support. And for those listeners that don't know, just perhaps give people a feel of what UK Sport's role is.
I'll start there and then answer the other bit afterwards. So UK Sport has two main roles in life. The first is that we provide funding and support to Olympic and Paralympic sport. So we fund over 50 organisations to enable our Olympic and Paralympic athletes to achieve their ambitions of becoming an Olympic or Paralympic champion. And the second thing we do is we work with sports to bid to host and then actually host major sporting events and some mega sporting events. So everything from sort of smaller scale events right the way through to things like the Women's Rugby World Cup this summer and the European football in 2028. So a whole range of different events. They're the two spaces we mostly play in. The bulk of it is around funding Olympic and Paralympic athletes and sports, and the other being the major events piece. And I came across 5.5 years ago from hockey, and I loved my job at hockey and I loved the time I had at hockey. When you're in a single sport, you're very focused on everything that sport is doing. And England hockey, our responsibilities went from grassroots right the way up to the Olympic level of the sport, with stuff that we were doing in schools right the way through the talent pathway and so on. And so you're doing real depth in one sport. And then you go from doing that to doing very specific work, very much at the elite level and major event level, but across breadth. So across a real breadth of sports. And I wasn't looking for a new job when the job came up. I'd been CEO at hockey for 10 years, which is quite a long time, but I absolutely loved it. And I've never been one of those people who has had a sort of grand plan about my career. I've wanted to really enjoy what I'm doing, and I loved it at hockey. But the job at UK Sport was probably one of only a couple of jobs that would have sort of tempted me to have a look. And so when I was called by the agency, I was like, yeah, I'm curious about this job. And you go through the process and then you become more excited about what the opportunity is. So yeah, I love it. I loved hockey, but I love this too.
Do you know what I'm hearing is, and I'm sure the listeners will hear this, is just your passion for it all. Even when you're talking about hockey, which was in the past and 5.5 years ago, you're like, I loved my job. I love my job. And I've been here nearly 15 years. And
Wow.
I never lose that passion for sport, because I think there's something about working in this sector. Where does your passion lie? Is it the grassroots? Is it the elite? Or is it right across the board? Or is it the people?
That's a really interesting question, that, and I love the fact that you sort of picked up on the passion. I don't know if you get asked this as a leader, but you quite often get asked the sort of question, what are the things that are your values? What are the things that keep you grounded? And I have three things that I think I would describe as my anchors, the things that I hold on to when things are hard or more challenging. And one of those things is passion. And I really believe that if you really love what you do, then actually you're more likely to kind of bring your best self to it. I had the good fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, of doing a job in the early part of my career for about 6 months that I really didn't like. And I look back now and think that was a real blessing, because it really taught me the importance of loving what you do and
appreciating it.
having that passion. In terms of what I'm passionate about within the sports sector, I'm a funny combination, I think. I'm a real grassroots girl at heart. I was never a particularly talented sports person, but I played a lot of sport as a young person. I was a member of pretty much every sports club going in my local community. I was a member of the canoeing club, I went to the diving club, I was a gymnast when I was young, and all of it when I was growing up. I did loads of this stuff. But actually, it was the Olympic Games in 1988, when the men's hockey team became Olympic champions, that really ignited something in me about maybe taking sport not more seriously in terms of being serious about it, but potentially going and being a bit more competitive. So whilst I wasn't very good at it, I was quite competitive, and I was a member of a hockey club for a long, long time, one club which I loved, and some of my best friends are still friends that I made when I was at that club. But what I love now, and I particularly love about my current job, and it's one of the things I loved when I was at hockey as well, is how elite sport and Olympic and Paralympic sport particularly, it grips the nation, it grips people. We love Olympic and Paralympic sport in this country because it feels like girl next door, boy next door, and we love that. But what I really love is how we all come alive for those sort of incredible moments, those extraordinary moments when an athlete does something extraordinary. But I love also how we're using the platform of that success and the exposure of the Olympic and Paralympic Games and the major events that we do to have a really positive impact on society that goes beyond just that medal moment or just that extraordinary moment. And whether that's through some of the stuff we're doing around events, some of the impact we're having on society through diversity or sustainability, whether it's just an athlete going into a school showing their medal and a kid looking at it like a Willy Wonka chocolate factory golden ticket, just whatever it is. I love how we're using this platform of success and how brilliant our athletes are to impact positively on society.
I think just listening to that as well, and you can honestly hear the passion in you. For me, it's not that dissimilar. That there's two sides of the coin for me. I call it sport is the springboard for change, because you can see how it, for the athlete, it grows confidence, it grows sociability, it grows awareness. But then also working in disability sport like I do is just seeing how the community, the wider population, start to embrace people with disability. I know that UK sport have been fantastic supporting that, because you actually supported the IBSA World Games that we led, but you were the major funder of that. And it was the first time it'd ever been on British soil, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's really interesting when you look at how disability sport has evolved in this country, and particularly since probably London 2012. We have Tanni Gray-Thompson on our board, UK Sport, and one of the things she talks about is how 2012 had an impact on how people perceived people with disability, but it hasn't really changed the lives of people with disability.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a really interesting observation from her. And I'm not disabled, but I regularly listen to some of the challenges she faces every day in just trying to live her life. But what I think London 2012 did is it definitely changed people's perception of disability. And I think what we've seen since then, I mean, what was 13 years ago now, is we've seen a real journey for disability sport in this country. And I love how Dave Clark, the chief exec of the British Paralympic Association, describes it. And he talks using the phrase journey, but he talks about the journey that Paralympic sport particularly has been through, from where it was observed and there was curiosity, but right the way through to the fact that now it's consumed. It's sport that is consumed by people. And I think that it's had a huge impact, Paralympic sport, at the highest level on people's perception of disability, and our role in that in UK sport in terms of how we fund the Olympic, this case, Paralympic athletes, but also how we invest in major events. And the IBSA World Games was a really important event for us because we hadn't had that event in this country before. It hadn't been done. And it was, I think, a brilliant showcase of the different sports that are within that multi-games event. And you guys did a fantastic job of hosting it. You were brilliant hosts.
Thank you.
As were Birmingham. Birmingham were great as well, weren't they?
Yeah, Birmingham and the University of Birmingham were brilliant. All the partners were good. I think what people probably aren't aware of with the likes of UK Sport is that you make that investment for the event. I think this has perhaps been under your tenure, not necessarily, I don't know about the past, but because we're mostly grassroots, but you also made that investment in legacy. So we took the funding that you gave for the games, which was brilliant, enabled us to put on the games. But then there was also a smaller pot of money, but such an essential pot that we could then carry on some of the legacy from that work. So when you talked earlier about it's that sort of like almost ripple effect that sport has, how it changes people's perception, it gives the nation something to cheer about, just things like Showdown. We've now started a Showdown League on the back of the IBSA World Games. And that means we've got 8 clubs across the UK that we're working with, enabling blind and partially sighted people right across the country to participate. So something like that, I just don't know how much it gets shouted about that kind of investment and the way it can really change people's lives.
Yeah, it's really important to us when we're investing in events that at the outset, the organisation that wants to host the event has really thought about what is going to be the impact of hosting this event. And we'll invest in events for different reasons. Some of the events that we'll do are really driven by performance needs, i.e. it will help athletes qualify for the Olympic or Paralympic Games, or it's a direct preparation ahead of the Games. There are other events that we'll fund that will have a sort of much bigger impact and engagement in terms of engaging communities. And so there's different reasons why we might invest, but for any of our events we invest in, we have a kind of scorecard about how we view it. And part of that is about how are the event organisers going to use that event to have an impact. And what you've just described there is a really good example of that. And I think that what we're seeing in more and more of our sports and event hosts is the starting driver for wanting to host an event is about potentially the impact it can have. And your example you've just given is a really good example of that. And utilising the event as a platform for doing other things, which is really good.
Yeah, that fits in quite nicely as well, because one of my questions was about you launched the 10-year strategic plan in 2021, and I'll come on to the impact of COVID in a minute, but because I'm sure that's had its own challenges. But your strategic plan is called Powering Success, Inspiring Impact. So, you're talking there about the fact that you're constantly thinking ahead about not just the moment, but what the impact it can have. How has that approach gone? And we're almost halfway through that strategic plan now. What have been the major successes, and also what are the current challenges?
Yeah, we are halfway through, which is quite scary in a way. Our mission in our strategic plan is to create the greatest decade of extraordinary sporting moments that really do impact on society. Now, a lot of those extraordinary sporting moments, the vast majority, are on the field of play. They are when an athlete does something really incredible, or a group of athletes does something really incredible on the world stage that excites and engages us all. But there are also so many other extraordinary sporting moments that we see. The example I gave a minute ago of when an athlete takes a medal into a school and speaks in an assembly. But what we're also doing now is we are working on a number of programs that actually really help to amplify some of the things that our athletes are doing. I don't know if you're familiar with the Changemaker program that we've introduced, which is where we're working in partnership with the BOA, the BPA and Olwyn, who run the National Lottery, to work with a cohort of athletes to use their platform for specific projects. And we've got a whole group of Olympic and Paralympic athletes who have applied for a grant to help them either start a project that's going to have an impact in their community or scale a project that they've already started. And a really good example for you is Tully Kearney from GB Aquatics, who has done this amazing project called Now I Can Run, which is about developing a frame for running so that people can run with a frame. It's brilliant. She applied for that fund. She's got a grant. She's now scaling that work. Robin Love from our wheelchair basketball team with British Wheelchair Basketball, she's doing a love handles project around shared.
Dan Powell, who's one of our blind judo Paralympians, I think Dan's doing a project as well, isn't he?
Yep.
If I remember rightly.
Yep, correct. And this is when I talk about the decade of extraordinary moments, like some of those extraordinary moments will be what some of these athletes are doing with people in their own communities, back at their own clubs, giving opportunities for future generations. But I think when I think more holistically or from a higher level about our strategic plan, I think some of the things that I think of are, I really think that we've changed the narrative around winning and winning well. So we've got, under our mission of creating the greatest decade, we've got three ambitions. One of them is about winning and winning well. One is about our thriving sporting community. The other is about inspiring positive change. And when we talk about winning and winning well, I quite often get asked, oh, so you're happier if we win fewer medals? And I'm like, well, no, not really, because I don't think it's either or. I do not believe that we have to choose between winning and winning with integrity. And so what I feel really sort of satisfied about at the sort of halfway mark of our strategic plan is I feel like we've changed the narrative and we have created already so many extraordinary moments, either through the Olympic and Paralympic Games themselves and the success of our athletes there, but some of the things that we're doing back home through major events or things like the change makers is astonishing, really.
Yeah, and things like the showdown that I was mentioning earlier, the stuff in the
Yeah.
background. Yeah. What about the major challenges? And part of that, I suppose, not just challenges for the strategic plan, but you came in 5.5 years ago. You hit the ground running, no doubt, but then you were hit with a global pandemic and the impact that must have had on elite sport. Tell me a little bit about the challenge of that, and also what did you learn from it? I think we're all still learning what COVID meant for all of us personally and professionally, but I admire the fact that you kept it all going.
Yeah, it was really extraordinary, actually. It was on the day, 6 months into the job, that the Olympic and Paralympic Games of Tokyo got postponed. So
Wow.
it was 6 months to the day that I started. And of course, it was sort of like the month leading up to that when we'd gone into lockdown. I don't think anything prepared any of us for what that would be. And I think for me, I'm a planner. And so I very much like our organisation to have real clarity on our strategy and clarity on our annual operations plan. That just completely got put to one side. And what we talked about, we need to focus on what we described as the three Ps. We were going to protect Olympic and Paralympic sport. That was our first piece. So protect was first. The second was around us playing our part. So we recognised that we were part of a bigger community outside of sport. What could we do to play our role in as a citizen of the UK, if you like? So protect and play our part, but also to prepare. So the third P was to prepare. And that was about preparing for coming out of COVID so that we could hit the ground running for our athletes to ensure that they weren't going to be disadvantaged going into a postponed games. And a big part of the prepare was around enabling athletes to be able to go back training. So sport, elite sport, we did an incredible amount of, and the collaboration was phenomenal across the sports and the different agencies and organisations to enable our athletes to go back to training when everybody else was still in lockdown. And it was one of the best examples of different organisations coming together to do and achieve a common goal, which was enabling our athletes to get back training, to enable them to prepare for the Olympic and Paralympic Games, a postponed Olympic and Paralympic Games. Every week when our senior team met, we were entirely focused on protect, prepare, play our part. What are we doing under these three headings? The annual plan that had been put in place had been put on the shelf. This is what we're focused on. And we re-engineered how we worked as an organisation in the short term to focus on those things. So all of our staff were focused on protect, prepare and playing our part. And yeah, you learn a lot about yourself and you learn a lot about others in that situation. One of the things I learned the most about our community in Olympic and Paralympic sport is just the art of what is possible when people truly collaborate.
I think it's interesting as well, going back earlier about the two reasons why I'm in sport, and one of them is that passion for change, but also I happen to love the people in sport. I think you mentioned earlier that you've always been sporty, you're quite competitive. And I think what that means is we often meet very like-minded people, some of ex-athletes, some have always just had that drive, quite driven people, quite team focused, and also wanting to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
So when the chips are down, as COVID happened, you do see people come into the fore. And I think I saw that in this sector too, very much so.
Yeah, I agree with that. You can also sometimes see the worst of people. And it's really interesting, right? And you may well recognize this as a sort of fellow leader. I love leadership. I love leading. And leading when things are going well is actually pretty easy, I think.
Mm,
I don't think it's hard at all. What you want to know, or what I want to know as a leader, when you want to know how good you are, how good you can be. And
yes.
so you want to be tested, like you say, when the
Yeah.
chips are down, can you cut it? Can you
Yeah.
still lead effectively? And I think one of the things that COVID did is it really put all of us in leadership positions under real pressure to
Yes.
prove were we capable of leading
Yeah.
or not. And so I quite enjoyed that, if I'm being really open. I liked the pressure it put me personally under, and us as a leadership body, UK sports,
Yeah.
a leadership body. Were we going to stand up and play a part in doing something really positive? And I feel really proud of what we did during that period, because our actions actually did enable our athletes to
Yeah.
get back training ahead of nearly every other nation in the world, which gave us a real competitive edge going into the games in Tokyo.
And I think it sounds as well around the leadership was that rather than panic, we did something very similar. We did respond, recover, and thrive. Like, how are we going to do
Yep.
that? Slightly different and obviously on a very different scale. But I think what I learned in those early days was not to be reactive in order to actually, as a leader, stand back and go, right, what do we actually need? And what do the people here need? And what do the people that we serve need in order to support in the most appropriate way? And I think that is the challenge, a bit like you. If you surround yourself with people that are always going to agree with you, then life's very easy, but you're not going to grow.
No.
So, and certainly COVID helped us drown or grow. And I think thankfully in sport, I saw more growth than I did the other, which is
Yeah, I
fantastic.
agree. And it was a great reminder, wasn't it, to us as a nation of how important sport is to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that getting out and being active as well from
Yeah.
that grassroots level.
Yeah.
That's a huge achievement that you did that. What do you feel is your biggest achievement since joining UK Sport as CEO?
There's probably a few things that I would probably
Okay.
reference. So one is one thing I've already mentioned. I feel proud that we are proving that you can win and win well.
Mm,
And that we really can win with integrity. Like, sport's a people business, and elite sport no different from the rest of sport. We're always going to have people that want to do things that may not align with our values and doing things with integrity, and we have to root those people out. But I think what we're proving is that it's not mutually exclusive. Athletes can have a really positive experience and still win. And look, our athletes are trying to do something incredible. You think about how many people that you might have met in your life said, oh yeah, I was county champion or something. This isn't
yeah,
county champion, this isn't regional champion, this isn't even a national champion. These are people that are trying to be the best in the
the
world
world.
at something. I think because Olympic and Paralympic sport, because we've become so good at it for so long, I think it becomes easy to think, and I sometimes hear people thinking, oh, it's easy. Well, it's harder than it's ever been, and our athletes continue to push the boundaries of what they can do. And so when you're trying to be the best at the world at something, it's not going to be easy. So
No,
the environment to enable them to do that is going to be tough, but that doesn't mean that they can't enjoy it. It doesn't mean it can't
no.
be done with integrity. And we want every athlete who leaves one of the programs that we fund to be able to look back and say, oh God, I remember the fitness testing and that might have felt hideous, but overall my journey was positive and I'm a better human being for having
Yeah,
been part of that program. I'm a better
yeah,
athlete, but really importantly, I'm a better human being. So I feel like that we've changed the narrative and I feel proud of that. We've grown the amount of money that's coming into Olympic and Paralympic sport in this country significantly in the last
right.
5 years, and I'm proud of that. But the third thing that I'm probably really proud of, which we're still on a journey with, is how I really feel that collaboration feels different to when I started. I remember when I was being interviewed for the job and I was asked, what did I think our system, our community needed? And I said, I really feel there is a call for collaborative leadership. So, for how we at UK Sport work with the Home Nation Sports
Yeah.
Councils, how we work with the BPA, the BOA, the institutes, and so on. Like, we're not there yet. I think there's still a long way we can go to really make it as good as it could be. But I feel like we've made real progress in that space, particularly when I look across the UK, the relationships with England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, the collaboration, and people are thinking about how can the product of what we do together be greater than what we might do on our own. We're seeing that increasingly with sports as well. So they're the things that feel like the big achievements, but there's more to go, definitely in the collaboration space.
That is amazing. Collaboration is the key. I remember when I came into this job, I was like, well, why don't we work with all these other impairment groups? We're not in silos. We've got to
Yeah.
work together in order
Yeah.
to actually achieve so much more. Definitely, I've seen collaboration at its best in the last few years. I've definitely seen that there's change and people can see the impact of taking from each other's areas of expertise and each other's networks to get the best out of people and the best for our communities.
And part of that, Lana, is about having the humility to recognise that other people and other organisations may know more or have better knowledge than you do. But even
Absolutely.
if they don't have better knowledge, they'll have different knowledge that could potentially challenge your thinking.
Yeah.
And I'm a real believer in leadership roles, in the people that you work with, employing people who have better subject matter expert than you do in their,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
easier for me in a relatively reasonably sized team. Some of the people I work with, like, just incredible. I look at some of my team and I sit in meetings with them and I listen to some of what they say and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And I love the
Yeah.
fact that I'm constantly learning from the
Yeah.
people around me in terms of how they go about their business. Yeah, and there's loads of that. That's in spades around our community.
And in leadership as well, it's about the humility, but also giving people the opportunity because somebody might come up with a brilliant idea or see it in a different way from you. But it's actually okay to say, yeah, let's try it your way.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, you're stuck on the same cycle. I try very hard to surround myself with people who have a different skill set from me, different life experience, different knowledge. And I want my job really is to help develop them, grow their wings and fly, because that actually ultimately helps me too.
Yeah.
That's really what it should be about. Going back to you, during your time as CEO at UK Sport, and actually also probably in hockey, what have been your most memorable, enjoyable, either Olympic, Paralympic, hockey moments for perhaps Team GB or just when you go, oh God, I love this moment?
I'll talk probably more about my most, like, the last while I've been at UK Sport.
Yeah,
And I think probably if I think about the Tokyo Games, the actually getting there, getting the athletes there, I was really lucky that I went to Tokyo. There was very few people allowed to go. And I felt pretty emotional just seeing our athletes there competing and thinking about how our community of the governing bodies, us, the government, the institutes, the BOA, the BPA had all played their part in enabling athletes to train and get, for the most part, COVID free to the games. An Olympic and Paralympic Games only comes once every 4 years. Athletes wait for this moment. So I have to say that it still gives me goosebumps now,
yeah, I can
thinking
understand
about,
that.
I remember how I felt being in Tokyo, seeing our athletes competing. More recently, I think one of my most memorable moments was, again, I was lucky to be in Paris for both the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And I was fortunate to be at the Paralympic rowing regatta on the day when it was just phenomenal. They had their greatest ever para regatta, just performance after performance after performance. And the reason why this is so memorable for me, other than just the achievement in itself, but I was with Nick Webborn, who is now our new chair, but was
Yeah,
previously the chair of the BPA. He and I were together on a platform behind us was the performance director and the head coach of the rowing the para rowing squads, and down in front of us were the athletes and some of the other staff. And so we're sort of stood between, looking between this communication as all the athletes were coming off the water, having just achieved a personal best or won a medal or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we had this bird's eye view of this unfolding between committed staff who have given everything to wrap the best that they could around these athletes to achieve their ambitions. And it just played out in front of us like this just beautiful movie. And yeah, that it will stick with me for a long time. But to have that sort of regatta after the success that para rowing have had, that was a really, really memorable and very special moment. And one of the joys of my job, right, is that there's a lot of challenges you get, but you also get the joy of being able to see some of these things up close. And that was one of the great things about being at hockey, that you're that much closer than I am now.
Yeah.
You get to know some of the athletes really, really well, and seeing them achieve their dreams and putting everything out there to achieve their dreams. Yeah, it's pretty memorable.
And knowing what they've committed, given up, or
Yeah.
challenged themselves with to get there.
Yeah, yeah.
You just talked about parasport then, and just a couple of questions really around that. You mentioned earlier that since 2012, the landscape of disability sport has changed in recent years. How do you think we can best support the continued development of inclusive sport in the UK?
I do think disability sport has really evolved, and it's interesting because in performance terms at the elite end, we're seeing huge progress in the Paralympic movement around the world, which is brilliant, but it's also making it ever more competitive for us, which we're seeing as a good thing because it's a good thing for the Paralympic movement. We've also hosted more para events in this country over the last few years than we've ever done before. Para badminton, para fencing, para triathlon, the event that you and I were discussing earlier, wheelchair curling. And I think that we shouldn't underestimate the impact of hosting events in this country, whether able-bodied or events that are for people with disabilities. I think that we can use those events as a platform, but we can also use things like I was talking about earlier, the Changemaker program, really encourage our para athletes who have got great followings on social media to use their platforms to have a positive impact to encourage inclusive sport. It's really interesting. I was talking to you earlier about how we do our events and encouraging the event hosts to really think about what impact they want to have. We've partnered with a number of companies in the event space to help sports think that through. And one of the companies we've partnered with is an organisation called Access Sport, who you may be familiar with. And that's to partner sports with someone like Access Sport to really help them think through what the impact of their event might be. So I think there is an opportunity for us to continue to use the platform of events, but also the platform that athletes have. I think the other role that we have at UK Sport as a funding agency, we give out a huge amount of money over an Olympic and Paralympic quad. We have about coming up to sort of £750 million worth of money over a quad that is distributed to sports and events and athletes and so on. And I think one of the things that we already do, but we can continue to do and continue to give priority to, is making sure that those grants come with conditions. So, for example, all of our sports having to have a diversity and inclusion action plan to be in receipt of public money. And I think that's really important that we use the lever of funding. A lot of our sports are just doing this now anyway. Like, they don't need the lever, they don't need the condition, but there are other sports that do need the condition. For some sports, it's about ability and disability. For other sports, it's about gender. For other sports, it's about ethnic diversity. It's really about encouraging sports to think through how is their sport inclusive and diverse, so that from our perspective, we can have sports and a sporting team that represents us at the Olympic and Paralympic Games that is truly reflective of British society.
Yeah. And actually, just on that, you talked about winning with integrity before. I think there's also leading with integrity. You giving those grants out and saying, and this is a condition of what we expect from you, is saying we're inclusive. And we want you to, if you're already there, great. But if you're not, let's help you get there. So I think that's really important. You touched on gender just then. I can't not talk about women in leadership and women in leadership in sport, because we're both female CEOs, and it can be a hard platform to be on. It's also seeing more women in leadership roles in sport in the last few years, for sure. But I think we've got a long way to go. And I think that for women and for disabled people too. How can we work as a collective at the sports sector to achieve that, to have more people sitting on the places of influence on a board as CEOs, as people that people can look up to, who are representative of our gender or from ethnically diverse backgrounds or disabled people?
It's a really good question. And I think that part of the solution is to keep talking about it. And there's obviously quite a lot going on around the world that is encouraging, at worst encouraging, at best enabling organizations and companies to row back from talking about diversity and inclusion. And we're seeing big companies move away from commitments and action. Interestingly, at UK Sport, our board discussed this quite recently, and we were sort of talking about the fact that there seemed to be sort of three camps where organizations were either rowing back from their commitments, or they were carrying on but doing it quietly, or they were doubling down. And our board were unequivocal, which made Catherine Granger was still there. She's just left us, but Catherine was chairing that meeting. And it made Catherine and I quite joyous listening to the unanimous doubling down of our role as a leadership body being absolutely unequivocal about our commitment around diversity and inclusion, from both the athlete cohort to the athlete support personnel that work with athletes to people working on events through to people in leadership. And further than that, not only doubling down on our own commitments, but also being more alert and alive to people who might see what's going on in the wider world, to see this as an opportunity to potentially reintroduce language or behaviours that don't sit alongside our values around inclusion and diversity, and facing into that and actually being willing to challenge that when we hear that. Because of course, language can create a narrative creates behaviours create a culture, and before you know it, we've gone back 10 years. And that isn't where we want to be. So I think what's really important is that those of us who are in leadership roles, but particularly those of us who are in leadership roles in leadership organisations, and UK Sport, we very much see ourselves as a leadership organisation. I think we have got to make sure that we are very public in the emphasis that we're placing on the value of inclusion and diversity, because we fundamentally believe that our community and our environment is better if it has more diversity. The other thing I think we've got to do is, and it puts a pressure on people, of course, but make the most of people who are in roles where they are really sort of setting the example. Dave Clark at the BPA, Nick Webborn now that has come in as our chair of people who are living with a disability. It's not relevant to them, but it's relevant to their ability to do the role that they're doing. I mean, Dave Clark at the BPA is such a incredible example for me of somebody who is, he's amazing at his job, but he's also willing to use his own personal circumstance to really, I've spoken to a number of people who have cited Dave as such a brilliant role model. He's not willing to allow his own personal circumstance to stop him from being amazing at what he does. Now, I don't in a million years profess to understand the daily challenge that he has with being visually impaired. And I remember when he first started, I said to him, look, Dave, I've never worked this closely with somebody who's visually impaired before. And I think I'm probably going to make some real mistakes in how I speak to you, in things that I might say or do. And I'm really sorry in advance for that. I'd want you to know that isn't intended, but I'd really hope that you've got the patience to help me as another leader in sport learn. And Dave's willingness to do that is what's going to change things for so many other people, because of the way he goes about his business. So I think it puts a pressure on him, right? Because there he is as a visually impaired leader who is a shining beacon to others. But Dave will be known for that. But more importantly, Dave will not be known just for being a brilliant CEO. He happens to be visually impaired. He's a really, really brilliant CEO, and I love working with him. We need to look at how we can really amplify those people who are in those sort of leadership positions so that others can see what is possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. The more opportunity that we provide and the more we see people who are successfully achieving, and you're right, that they have a disability, they may have a disability that does give them daily challenges, but we're seeing the person, not the disability. That's where we need to be, because that will provide more opportunity for people in the future. And none of us have walked in those people's shoes or each other's shoes, doesn't matter whose it is. And actually, we're all continuing to still learn from each other every day. And that's the important thing.
Yeah, totally agree.
It has been remarkable talking to you. I have to say, I would happily talk to you for about another 2 hours, but I'm sure the listeners will tune out at that point. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd say, great, I'll sit down and have another cup of tea. I love your insight. Your passion is exuding from the screen. I can't tell you how much that is. And it's so lovely to meet somebody who still has the passion that this sector deserves. Thank you for your time. And it's just been lovely to talk to you, and you're doing great work. And thank you so much for everything you've done to support British Blind Sport too.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for inviting me. I've enjoyed the conversation.